Today we're diving into how to create space in a mix, and trust me, this might sound simple, but it's one of the biggest struggles music producers face. Because creating space isn't just about EQ carving, it is way deeper than that, and I'll show you how to fix it in this video with very simple but powerful techniques. Now you'll be surprised to find out that creating space in a mix first of all has actually nothing to do with the mixer. Now that might sound strange, but it's true. Most of your biggest mixing issues are actually born as a result of decisions you made in the production phase. And if you don't solve them, then you're gonna have a hard time handling them during mixing. This is why arrangement and sound design are actually very important steps in the mixing process. Now you might be asking, how exactly do these affect my mixing choices? Arrangement on one hand is about when each element of your song comes into play. For example, you can have two sounds occupying the same space in a mix, but you don't necessarily have to place them at the same time in the song. One can come in at some point while the other one comes in at a different point, so they don't clash. Sound selection, on the other hand, is about choosing the right sonic textures that work well together. That is, sounds that naturally fit instead of those that clash. Now, these two topics are very broad topics on their own, but I've gone ahead to go and cover them in depth in this channel, so you can go ahead and check out the link in the descriptions for a detailed video on both arrangement and sound selection after you finish watching this video. Now once you have your sound selection and arrangement solid, it's time to get into the actual mixing process. And the technique that can help simplify the process is to start visualizing your mix in a 3D space. So instead of looking at your DAW as just a timeline with levels and plugins, imagine your mix as a room, a space you're filling with sound. This visual model will help everything in the next few steps make more sense. So here's the breakdown. First of all, we have the left to right, and this is your stereo field. It's what you control with panning. So you decide what sits left, you decide what sits in the center, and you decide what sits right. Top to bottom represents your frequency spectrum, and this is controlled by EQ. So the lower frequency elements stay at the bottom, while the higher frequency elements stay at the top. And lastly, you have your front to back, and this is your depth, and it is majorly controlled by volume. But other effects like compression, delays, and reverb can also have effects on the depth of sound. So you have louder and drier sound feel closer, while quieter and reverb heavy sound feel farther away. So now that you understand the space you're working with, let's go over them one after the other and dive into exactly how to use them for maximum impact in our mixes. Panning. This is your left to right placement, and is one of the fastest way to create clarity, separation, and width in your mix, and is shockingly underused or misused by most beginners. The major focus with panning is to have your core elements in the center. That is, you have your kick, your snare, your lead vocal, and bass should in most cases occupy the center. These are the anchors of your mix and should feel grounded and solid. You can then go ahead to pan supporting instruments away from the center. Hi-hat, shakers, background vocals, synth layers, guitars, you name them. These can all live to the sides, so spread them out to create space for the center elements to shine. But this is also where you need to be careful and cautious, because as much as we have the power to pan elements left and right, we also have to be aware that the mix needs to be balanced. So if you pan a guitar slightly left, you can also pan its supporting synth slightly right. Balance here is key. But not every sound needs an identical mirror, where you have a guitar to the left and another guitar to the right. But regardless, your mix should feel symmetrical. A quick trick that helps at times is hearing your mix in mono from time to time. If a sound disappears completely, it means that the stereo placement might be too wide or out of phase. So now that we've spread out our sound from left to right using panning, it's time to deal with the next dimension of space, and that is the up and down. This is your frequency range, and this is where EQ becomes your best friend. Now, EQ is simply the process of adjusting sound by shaping specific frequencies. Every sound takes up a space in the frequency spectrum, from deep bass to crisp highs. And EQ helps you cut or boost those specific frequencies for them to sit right in the mix. Now, many producers are familiar with a good number of EQ techniques, like cutting unwanted frequencies to make room for other elements, using the high pass or low pass filter to, cut out the extreme lows or extreme highs that are unwanted, boosting or cutting certain frequencies to enhance the character of each instrument. But the truth here is, if you're doing all this and not using dynamic EQ in your mixes, you're leaving clarity and space on the table. Dynamic EQ is like a smart reactive EQ. A dynamic EQ only kicks in when it is needed, based on the level of a frequency. It's like saying only cut out this muddy area when it starts becoming a problem. For example, let's say your vocal and your piano are both rich in the low mids. That is around like 300 to 500 hertz. Now you want both of them to sound full, but they start clashing at that range. Now you could actually just use a static EQ on the piano to make room for the vocal. But what happens when the vocal isn't singing? The piano then ends up sounding too thin. Now here is where dynamic EQ wins. You set the EQ to only reduce 300 to 500 hertz on the piano when the vocal is active. And when the vocal is silent, that part of the piano just comes back naturally. And this results in a cleaner mix with no tonal sacrifice. And yes, there's also a link in the description for a detailed video on how to, set up dynamic EQ and how to use it in your mixes. So we've handled width with panning and we've handled height with EQ. Now it's time to talk about the most underestimated mixing tool of all, and that is the volume. Now you see, volume isn't just loudness, it decides where a sound sits in the room. Now think about it, louder sounds equal closer to the listener, while quiet sounds are further in the background. This is your depth axis, and it forms the foundation of your mixed 3D space. So your goal with volume balancing is to keep your most important elements in the foreground and gradually take the other elements further back. Now over to compression. Compression is the tool that shapes dynamics. That is how a sound moves over time. When used right, it adds punch, sustain, and glue to your mix. So compression can help tame peaks so that the loud transients don't poke out, bring up quiet details so that the sound feels fuller, and also add weight and presence without significantly increasing the volume. Now, sidechain compression, on the other hand, is also a very, very important technique that can help create space in a mix. And it's mostly used when two or more elements occupy the same frequency range. For example, you have a kick and a bass. You use sidechain compression to make one element back off when the other one is present. So now we've talked about depth through volume and compression. Now let's focus on depth we achieve through reverb and delay. While volume is the primary tool for controlling depth, like we said earlier, louder feels closer, quieter feels farther away. Reverb and delays are your emotional enhancers, and they help sell the illusion of space. Whether it is a tight vocal booth or a massive concert hall, they help move sounds back in space, prevent everything from feeling flat and dry, and allow each element to breathe within the overall track. But the key here is control. Without proper handling, especially with reverb, they can easily blur the mix and make things sound distant or messy. Together, reverb and delay helps build a three-dimensional mix, where some sounds sit close, set in the middle, and some sit further back. When balanced properly, they improve separation, support the emotional feel of the music, and make your mix sound professional and intentional. Now at this point, you've got your mix structured. Your sounds are selected, panned, EQ'd, leveled, and spaced out. But to keep the balance consistent throughout the track and to respond to the natural changes in your song, there is one final tool you need: automation. Now automation allows you to make precise changes over time in your mix. Whether it's volume, panning, EQ, reverb, effects, parameters, whatever. It's not about reinventing the mix, it's about refining it. For example, you can use automation to bring vocals or leads slightly forward during key phrases, reduce clashing instruments only when they overlap, controlling reverb and delays so that they enhance the mix without, making it muddy, make transitions between, sections feel smooth and intentional. Even very, very little changes like, reducing 1 dB or 2 dB here and there can make a huge difference. Think of automation as your final pass, where you make sure that every part of your mix reacts properly to the energy of the song. It's like that extra 5 to 10% that makes your mix feel clean, polished, and professional from start to finish. So that'll be all for this video. And yes, I know I covered a lot, and there are a whole lot of topics here and there, but most of them I've already gone over them in details on this channel. So you can go ahead and check the links in the description. There are a whole bunch of videos that are right there waiting for you. Check them out. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.